Okay, can everybody see that? Yes, great. And just fix some things here so I can see. So again, I can't really see the chat as I'm screen sharing. So Phyllis will be monitoring the chat. And I'm gonna get started, and I'm just gonna look again real quick to see who we have here. And Phyllis and Melissa, if you could let people in, admit them into the room as they're coming in, that would be great. So hi everybody, thanks for joining tonight. My name's Erin Dilworth. I'm the Deputy Director at Communities for a Healthy Bay. And we're here tonight to talk about a proposal from SeaPort Sound Terminal and the draft environmental impact statement that came out 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. It's taken a while to read it. And just for some basics, I'll just say it one more time. Please use the chat. I'm going to go over the agenda. If you have questions about specific things that I'm saying, as I'm saying it, maybe raise your hand. And if I don't see you, Melissa or Phyllis, please let me know that there's a hand raised, or you can put your question in the chat. And then there's going to be time. We have plenty of time at the end, because there's going to be issues that I'm probably not going to specifically address, but hopefully if you have questions about them, I can answer them, or at least help, we can find the answer. Okay. And so I do want to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step towards true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond. And I do want to give a quick shout out to folks that help make this work happen with funding. So thank you to Tacoma Creates, Department of Ecology, Harder Foundation, Patagonia, Bullet Foundation, and the Rose Foundation, and our community members that sponsor and support us. And just again, quick agenda for today. I'm going to kind of cover a background about SeaPort Sound Terminal and where it is and what it does, what their proposal is, what our findings are, and then get into a little bit of technical details, and then talk about the best ways to take action on this issue. So here is a map of the facility that we're looking at. So this is Commencement Bay and the Port of Tacoma and the Tacoma Tide Flats, northeast. Can you guys all see my pointer too? Okay, thank you. And then northeast Tacoma is over here along Marina View Drive. Here is SeaPort Sound. This is my great graphic that I made in Paint. So, but I think it works. So SeaPort Sound has two different parts, kind of this tank farm over on the Marina View Drive side. And then they actually have on the Hylebos Blair Peninsula here, they have, this is where their rail yard is. So you can see all of the tanks. It's kind of a little bit harder to see the rail yard, but just know that it is there. And then this is the project site that we are looking at for this proposal. So on the left here is kind of a close-up of the facility, one part of the facility and the area where this proposal is taking place. So you can see along, here's Marina View Drive, here's the Hylebos Waterway, and then this is a schematic from SeaPort Sound. So you can kind of see how these shapes are the same. These are the bigger tanks that are going to be going into this area here. And SeaPort Sound, just in case anybody doesn't know, is a fossil fuel storage, blending, and transshipment facility. And transshipment just means they put stuff out, fuel out, via rail, vessel, truck, and pipeline, and they also accept fuels that way. And the different types of fuels that they carry, a lot of transportation fuels, so just your regular everyday like gasoline, diesel. They do ethanol. Sometimes they'll do crude oil. I haven't seen it in a while, but they also do a lot of maritime fueling, so fuels that are meant for like the bigger cargo ships that we see out there, or the grain ships or whatever. Okay. This is a better image of where the project is going to take place, and 350 Tacoma took this really great photo. So you can see these are some of the tanks that are going to be demolished, and then also part of the project is to demolish old refinery equipment, and that's what kind of all this like piping and stuff is here. And so again, here's the Hylebos down at the bottom, and then Marine View Drive is kind of towards the top of the screen. Did somebody have a question? No, okay. So what is the actual proposal? So this started back in 2020 when SeaPort Sound first put in their application, their permit to do this work. And originally the city said, oh yeah, there might be some issues, but they're not going to be too bad, essentially, is what their conclusion was. And through the advocacy of this community, we asked for them to do a more thorough environmental review, because we knew there would be really adverse, significant impacts. And so, and kind of in a victory and something that doesn't usually happen, the city reversed their decision and said, oh yeah, actually this is significant. And so you're going to have to, SeaPort Sound, you're going to have to do an environmental impact statement. So here we are 2 years later, and they have the EIS out, the draft EIS. And so what this proposal is they're going to demolish 7 fossil fuel tanks, like you saw in those photos, and replace them with 8 newer and bigger tanks. So those tanks are a lot bigger. And what this project will do is increase SeaPort Sound's fossil fuel storage capacity by 11%. And that might not seem like a huge deal, but we'll talk about the impacts later and what we know about climate change, right? We know that we need to be going the exact opposite direction. We need to be quickly, swiftly, smartly switching over to low carbon, zero carbon energy sources. So we know this is the wrong direction. Part of this, again, is to demolish the old refinery equipment. Just so everybody knows, the refinery equipment hasn't been operational since 2002. They're also going to demolish and update their wastewater treatment infrastructure and replace a clogged stormwater line. Okay, and here is kind of the management regulatory landscape that we're in, and the biggest thing that I'm going to be talking about tonight is the State Environmental Policy Act. This is where we have a lot of ability as advocates to kind of point to the law and say, hey, they did or they did not follow the law. And so State Environmental Policy Act, I'm going to refer to it as SEPA. So when I said that they changed their mind, they reversed their decision. What they did was they made a determination of significance. That's very wonky regulatory jargon. And what that means, again, the city said, yes, this project will have significant adverse environmental impacts. Because of that, you have to do an environmental impact statement. The things that you have to, or an EIS, the things you have to do in an EIS is look at the full range of impacts. So any likely scenario that might come from the proposed project, you have to look at what those impacts could be. And then you also have to describe what you could do to mitigate those impacts. So what you could do to kind of offset, make it better, make it less harmful, whatever. So those are kind of the 2 big elements that are in an environmental impact statement. And our big conclusion is that this draft environmental impact statement did not follow SEPA because they did not study the impacts, the full range of impacts that they should have. So our big conclusion, SeaPort Sound did not fulfill the requirements of SEPA. They failed to show the full range of possible impacts to greenhouse gases and risks from likely increase in rail, vessel, and vehicular traffic. So that's kind of like our big picture issue, our big picture talking point. Okay. I'm actually going to stop for just a second and see, and I'm going to stop sharing screen so that I can see everybody better.
While you're paused, Erin, Barbara has a question.
Okay.
What was the limit on expansion in new regs? Was it 10%?
Hold on one second. I'm trying to, oh, there we go. Stop share. The question was, what was the limit on expansion in the new regulations?
The tie flat regulations.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good question. And it would have been great if I had addressed that earlier. So what Barbara's talking about is the tide flats and non-interim regulations. Because this permit was submitted before the non-interim regulations were done, it's grandfathered in.
Okay.
So they are operating on the old regulations, and this, we knew this would happen right during all of that time that permits would start to come in. Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, legacy permit. Does anybody else have any other questions about just the project itself or the facility so far? I'm about to kind of get into like the more technical details. Okay, great. Share. All right. Okay, so I'm kind of go over 3 of what I view as the biggest issues with this draft environmental impact statement. There are many more issues with it than just the 3 things that I'm going to go over. And I'm sure that a lot of you have very specific concerns depending on where you live and what you like to do in the community. And so if you have concerns outside of these 3 things that I'm about to bring up, let's talk about those at the very end. So the first kind of technical conclusion that I made is that this draft environmental impact statement hides behind market demand. So what they did in this draft environmental impact statement is they took 3 market scenarios. So essentially what's going to happen in the fossil fuel market, who's going to want what kind of fuel. And what they did was they didn't study for each scenario. They didn't study what it would look like if SeaPort Sound was able to reach their capacity. So we would expect that with this increased fossil fuel storage, and even with their existing permits that they already have, they could fill up, drain, send out more fossil fuels more quickly. Unfortunately, that wasn't studied because that wasn't deemed as part of one of these 3 market scenarios. And so you can see, so these are quotes that I pulled right from the draft environmental impact statement. They're saying, transportation throughput is driven by market demand, not an increase in storage capacity. So they're saying that them building these tanks is not the reason why more fossil fuels might come through town. They're saying it's market demand. And so that's kind of the reason why they're saying they don't need to study it. They don't need to look at it because it's not them doing it. It's the market. We find that an unacceptable that's unacceptable logic as far as we're concerned. Another statement they make kind of using that same logic, overall, it is anticipated that there will be no adverse impact on transportation as a result of the proposed action. Any changes in transportation to and from the site is driven by changes in market demand. So when they're talking about transportation, what they're talking about is rail traffic, vessel traffic, truck traffic, things where there likely very much will be adverse impacts. And they're saying that they're not going to study it, essentially, or that they really didn't study it. They just said there's not going to be adverse impact. That, again, that's unacceptable. They should have to, like the State Environmental Policy Act requires, they should have to look at those different scenarios, kind of that worst case scenario, that whole range of possibility of what could happen if this project takes effect. And they didn't do that. They essentially said, we don't know what's going to happen because we don't know what the markets are going to do. And again, that's just unacceptable to us. That's right, Maddie, LOL. Okay. So the other thing that this project, they say that this project is to help them with operational flexibility so that they can meet the rising demand for new kind of cleaner biofuels. If that were the case, we'd be super excited. You know, we want our businesses that are here to adapt and change and address the climate crisis. There's no guarantee, no commitment anywhere from SeaPort Sound that they're actually going to be displacing fossil fuels. And that's really frustrating. And, you know, that type of greenwashing can make people think, oh, okay, great. We don't need to, they're going to be biofuels, clean fuels, whatever, you know, let's move forward. No, we shouldn't stop this. But there's no evidence that they're actually going to change up their fuel mix in any kind of significant way. And so, again, I pulled out a couple of quotes from the environmental impact statement. One, ultimately, the use of the assets proposed by SeaPort Sound, that's the new tanks, the new piping, whatever, will be driven by market demand and equipment design. So they're making no commitments themselves. They're saying they act at the whim of the market. And then again, the proposed action would not introduce any new products other than those already stored on site. So they're not even proposing to bring on new different types of fuels. And so don't worry too much about the numbers here, but I did just kind of want to show you guys what their proposal is. So you can see these are the scenarios, the market scenarios I was talking about. On the left here, this is the no action. So what essentially that means is this is what the fuel mix will look like under these three scenarios if nothing happens, if the status quo just stays the same. Over here on the right these are the three market scenarios for what would happen if they build these tanks. I'm trying to move some things around so I can see here. So you can see they're not very different. They're not different in any kind of significant way that would actually get us closer to our climate change goals, right? What we need to be doing to really address climate change, I'm not seeing that type of commitment here in these graphs. And so if you can't see, so the types of fuel that we're talking about here, gasoline, RG, the dark green is refined gasoline, ethanol, diesel, refined diesel, and biodiesel. So it's a very, biodiesel is barely visible in most of these scenarios. So I just wanted to put this visual up here to show that they really have not committed themselves to making much of a change, especially not any type of change that would help us meet our goals. And then kind of the last big issue that I see with this draft environmental impact statement is that they did an insufficient greenhouse gas analysis. I'm happy that they were required to do one, but it was not done accurately and with the most up-to-date data. So the greenhouse gas analysis that they did do shows that there would be a 9% increase across all scenarios from the construction, operation, and combustion of the fossil fuels that would go through and be stored at that facility. So 9%. So yeah, that's not moving us in the right direction. We need to be rapidly eliminating carbon and greenhouse gases from our atmosphere in order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. And so again, this is going in the wrong direction. And then kind of underneath that, some details there, they didn't account for leakage. So anytime you're moving fossil fuels through a pipeline, through a rail car, whatever, there's seals on those vessels. They're not always, airtight. There's always some kind of leakage of vapor that comes out. It does not look like they accounted for that leakage. They also say throughout their greenhouse gas analysis that they didn't really know where all their fuels were going and how far they traveled. So they didn't have great data for, the transportation of those fuels. And that should be accounted for anytime you want to know the whole life cycle of your greenhouse gases. They also used outdated data. So we get data from the International Panel on Climate Change for, what the impact of certain greenhouse gases is. They used the 5th assessment, which is just the 5th version. And we have the 6th version out now, and they could have used that and they didn't. They also used the 100-year global warming potential factor. And if anybody closely followed the Tacoma LNG liquefied natural gas facility fight or is following it, you'll know that that was a big issue with when that greenhouse gas analysis was done. And what that does is it looks at the impact of the greenhouse gases over 100 years versus within the first 20 years after they're emitted, which is really more in line with the lifetime of this project. Looking at something over 100 years really lowers the impact, or it falsely lowers the impact, because it is you have a longer amount of time for those emissions to come out and to kind of lose their what's the word I want to look for? Lose their intensity. So using the 100-year is just a way to make the project look not as bad. Okay, so I'm gonna pause again and stop my screen share and see that there's dilutes the impact. Thank you, Riley. And I see that Yvonne made a comment, but Yvonne, I'm not exactly sure at what point you were.
When
what that was referencing.
when
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm trying to remember, but I think it was when you were talking about the fact that new fuels, they weren't going to add new fuels, or the promise that they weren't going to add new fuels in the EIS, and I just made the snarkier comment, unless market demand calls for new fuels. Yeah.
Right.
Later.
So
Market demand as a factor, a key factor in the production or the capacity. Sorry.
yeah, that's another good point. They could use market demand really to make all their decisions
Yes.
for them.
Exactly.
And okay, so I'm just real quick, we're gonna go over kind of the comment deadline and what comments can and should look like. And then we have all this time left over for questions, and we can dive into more details. So I'm gonna share screen one more time. When I find the button. Okay. So comments are due. This is a really awful timeline. Comments are due on Tuesday, December 27th. Originally, they were due on December 15th, which is tomorrow, but thanks to CHB and all of the community advocates that we work with, we were able to get that comment deadline pushed back. And it's really frustrating when these projects, this happens almost every year, where something gets proposed like towards the end of the fall and just happens to fall around Christmas and Hanukkah and New Year's. And it's frustrating because we know that a lot of people are out of town and not paying attention. And that could be the reason why some of these proposals come out when they do. So the best way to submit a comment is to, if you're going to write your own comment, is to email it to, they created its own unique email address, SeaPort Plant Modernization, DEIS, at cityoftacoma.org. You can do it old school, write your comments out and mail them in to Shirley Schultz. I'm going to include all of this information in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to like scratch all this down right now. The big thing that we want folks to focus on in their comments is that SeaPort Sound in this draft environmental impact statement did not fulfill their legal requirements under the State Environmental Policy Act. That's like the big picture. And then there's plenty of examples underneath where we know that they didn't actually look at the full range of possible scenarios, which is the main requirement in SEPA. And so effective comments are clear and concise, not meandering. I know that the folks appreciate shorter rather than longer comments, as long as you're getting your point made, and you can provide evidence. So if you can pull out citations from the DEIS, from the State Environmental Policy Act itself, anywhere where you want to pull out quotations, numbers, data, references, that's great. And that's really helpful. And again, cite the relevant laws. So in this case, the big one that we're talking about is the State Environmental Policy Act. But there's plenty of other laws that you could look to. You could look at the Shoreline Management Act. You could look at Tacoma's Climate Action Plan, comprehensive plan, and see if this really fits in with what the city says are its priorities. And we are going to also, in our follow-up email tomorrow, we're going to provide everybody with a link to a comment letter template. So we've essentially like filled out the body of it, but you can edit it. And then it's really easy, kind of an online submission form, and it'll go right to this SeaPort Plant Modernization email address. And it's really great with these template letters to edit it a little bit, personalize it, and say specifically about why you care about the project, and just add your own expertise, add your own experience. I only put in so many different points, but you can add whatever you would like. So again, that's going to come out tomorrow. We're also going to put talking points together in that email for you, so you can kind of pick and choose from the talking points if you'd rather just draft your own email. And then there's also going to be a link to this recording in that email tomorrow if you'd like to review anything. So, okay, for the last time, I'm going to stop share, and now is really the time for folks to ask questions. If there's stuff that I didn't cover that you're curious about, or just curious what our take is on it, if you've given it a read, yeah, we can just kind of have a discussion and conversation. That went quick, you guys.
That's because you're so good.
Hopefully I wasn't, thank you.
Okay.
I wasn't talking too fast.
Yeah, this is Mike. There were two things. The first thing I always start with is, regardless what their permits say, we've got a facility that's in a tsunami zone. And it's outside of the scope of this draft environmental impact statement, but I can't not say it. Is it inappropriate to say it in a response to, they say it's already permitted to a certain capacity. That's my next question. But is it inappropriate to say this thing's in a tsunami zone? Why are we still dealing with it?
No, it's not inappropriate. Part of the draft environmental impact statement does talk about construction and construction standards and kind of points to, earthquake. I'm not sure exactly what the term would be, but, construction and buildings that are earthquake resistant.
Right,
But
they
we
did
know that
say, yeah, they
we
did
know
say
that
that.
the tide flats are, it's a big giant delta with not very stable soils, subject to liquefaction, especially during an earthquake. So I think that it's totally appropriate to question what the building standards are, and to ask that the applicant, SeaPort Sound, show evidence that they're going to build whatever they are proposing to those standards.
Okay,
That's another kind of great way to make comments. Like if you don't know the answer, you can ask in your comments, what evidence exists that X, Y, and Z is happening? Can the applicant assure the city that they're going to meet these standards or do this thing? So that's totally appropriate to do that.
right. Okay, so the second part of that was just what you said, the building standards. They
Mhm.
did mention it, that permitting has to go on after.
Mm.
That's not done yet. It's not a done deal. This is just the beginning.
Yeah.
But then what did they say about the shoreline? They still have to get a shoreline permit as well?
Yes.
Is there, I mean,
Yes.
and you
So that's
brought it up again.
another kind of
I mean,
opportunity.
where do we find that? Does it mention anything about petroleum facilities in a tsunami zone?
It's not available for comment yet. So, but that's another opportunity to review and ask questions and provide comments and
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another threshold they have to
Mhm.
go on after this process we're doing now.
Yes.
Good, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks, Mike.
Claire has a question in the chat, and then I think Riley was next.
Okay. So Claire's question in the chat is, what are the risks of leaks during the work? Do you mean leaks like during construction? And leaks of like fossil fuels?
Yeah, fossil fuels and other
Mhm.
contaminant. I don't know that much about refineries, but I was wondering during the demolition process
Mhm.
of these tanks and of the refinery, what are the leaks, the potential for, I'm sure the sediment is contaminated if it's been there for a while, but it just seemed like a question and I didn't know if that was addressed.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Anytime you have some kind of fossil fuel infrastructure, even just a gas station, there's always going to be contamination in the soil. There's like a very specific mix of contaminants that are essentially, you can say if there's a gas station there or whatever, then these contaminants are in the soil. The other contaminants to think about are like what came from a SARCO when a SARCO was operating. And that site has been used for other industry too. It's been used for wood treating, maybe some metal recycling. There's so many different contaminants that could be there. And so so that's a great question. And some of what we'll ask too is, what contaminants are there? They lay out some of that in the draft environmental impact statement, and I can find that kind of like excerpt and send it to you or put it in the follow-up. But yeah, definitely there's contamination in the soil. And so the requirement will be for the contractor who's doing the construction work to create what's called a contaminated media management plan. So there's, certain things that they have to do to make sure that contaminated soil doesn't make its way into the water, or get airborne or whatever. And so that's another thing that we're going to ask to see. That should be something that's available for public review and comment. You know, we should be able to see that before it happens. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. Was Riley and then Yvonne, and then I see a question in the chat.
I just have a question on, in terms of submitting comments, in your opinion, is it going to be more effective to have a greater number of comments from, I mean, from my standpoint, from physicians, or would it be more helpful for us to submit a letter from our organization utilizing member voices and sign-ons?
It's a good question. So just for folks who may not know, Riley works for a partner organization called Physicians for Social Responsibility. Thanks, Riley. I mean, I think both are great. I think that the, you know, background and expertise that comes from doctors is really interesting, and not necessarily the expertise that like decision makers hear often. They don't necessarily think about public health as much as they obviously should. And so if you've got physicians who feel like they can address some of the specifics in this proposal, that would be a really great kind of tool for the city to have that knowledge and expertise. If you feel like you're more likely to get, you know, if you have physicians that maybe are like, I don't know, I don't really know what to say, then maybe at that time, then maybe it is a use of your time and resources just to try to get a higher volume of letters in. Because the city does pay attention. You know, if some project gets 1,000 letters, they're going to be like, whoa, that's wow. They might not take, you know, and often that comes from form writing, kind of like what we're talking about doing with a template letter. But that doesn't mean that those don't, each individual one counts as a comment. So.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I definitely can work with both. Just wanted to know if there was, one preferred over the other, but it sounds like whatever works best. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe on Yvonne.
Hey there. So I'm going to start this off by saying I haven't read the DIS yet. I've been sick on and off since it started, or since it came out. So I'm intrigued by their use of market demand as a means to keep the alternatives that they're looking at very narrow in scope. And I think that's awesome, that approach in working with the SEPA to fight it in that direction. I'm also kind of curious, I know that's some of the manipulation and trickery that PSE used when they were doing very similar things during their DIS and EIS processes. But is there a precedent across other, projects in the area or outside the area where, you can point to like the actual best practice is to look at, highest volume, or worst case scenario, as opposed to always looking, as manipulating it down, it's in their best interest to do so, but can we beef up our argument by pointing to a few projects that use worst case scenarios and studied them? And I also was curious whether they looked at, if they didn't use highest volumes, and obviously they probably didn't look at impacts to traffic or, air quality. I don't even know if they're asking PS Clean Air Agency to do an air permit. Obviously, if they're not increasing throughput, making that assumption, they're probably not. But a lot of those things would be triggered by those studies. Additional studies would be triggered by looking at the full capacity increase of 11%. So I'm thinking through my mind as I read through this and as I try to form my own arguments, is there other precedent to look at, to point to say, yeah, you should, it's best practice to look at full capacity when looking at alternatives?
Yeah, there's actually an example that just happened this year up in I think Anacortes. The group up there working on it is called Friends of the San Juans, and Phillips 66 has a huge refinery up there that they were trying to do an expansion on. And I feel like they were essentially saying, you know, we don't need to account for number of vessels. Like there was something weird they were doing where they weren't going to look at like essentially a worst case scenario. And Friends of the San Juans appealed that decision and won. And then what ended up happening was the regulator, who I'm gonna guess was like the city of Anacortes or maybe Whatcom County, came back and said to Phillips 66, like, okay, as part of your permitting requirements, you're gonna have to report on vessel traffic and report on truck traffic and report on this and ensure that there's no increases.
Right.
And Phillips 66 walked away from it. I guess that was too hard. So that is something I will pull the like a blog piece that Friends of the San Juans wrote about it.
That'd be great.
I can include that in the debrief email that we send out tomorrow. But yeah, so there is precedent
Okay,
for this requirement. Yeah.
that would be great, because I
Yeah.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head, did they look at each, probably not the traffic or
They said there'd be little to no
impacts.
impact.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And that's
Toxic air pollutants that are, comes from additional 11% of capacity,
Mhm.
Yeah, anyway,
yeah,
et cetera, et cetera.
right.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so there's some questions in the chat, I think.
Peter has a question. Are there any environmental positives in this proposal?
Okay, so I'm gonna say yes. They are and I'm gonna pull up the specific so I have it. So there's gonna be some energy efficiency savings that they get, but it's not from the tank expansion, it's from the wastewater treatment infrastructure update. So, and this is just going to be a direct quote from the draft environmental impact statement. Replacement of the on-site boiler would result in a substantial energy savings at the facility, up to 30% energy savings due to heat return efficiencies that the existing steam boiler does not have. So that's great. The upgrade would also reduce on-site water consumption by approximately 5 million gallons annually. And then there's a blocked city stormwater pipe on their property that they're required to fix. So that's good that that's going to get fixed. But they packaged this wastewater treatment upgrade and this stormwater project with the fossil fuel project when I don't think that was necessary. They could do those upgrades and those site improvements without the tank expansion. Yeah. Right. So I think that kind of helps doing that all together. Yvonne just wrote in the chat, allows them to call this a modernization project. And I think that, yeah, I think it was kind of packaged together that way very purposefully. Does anybody have any other, does anybody have any other questions or like specific things that you're wondering if they were covered in the draft?
A question, Erin. It seems like all the stuff they didn't study was all the stuff that people told them to study
Yeah,
when we were dealing with this 2 years ago. So like, are they really serious about this project? Like, are they just trying to push it through? Like, I'm thinking like, gosh, we've got to get comments, and it's like
Mhm.
almost Hanukkah and Christmas. And so is there a scenario where they just drop the tank expansion? Like, or are they just really just hoping to get it through by the seat of their pants? Because like if they didn't follow the law, like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's always the chance that they could decide, come back and like Phillips 66 did and say, this is too hard. Blame it on the harsh regulatory environment and say, you guys are putting too many rules on this, like, we're not going to do it. So that could happen. I think, my hope for the next step is that the city will go back to SeaPort Sound and say, this is insufficient, do it again, or do a supplemental environmental impact statement. Come back to us in a year when you've done your work. So further delay is great because that, pushes investors off. It, the company itself gets kind of tired of the regulations and the back and forth. The step after a final environmental impact statement would be those other permits, like the shoreline permit, the potentially a notice of construction permit from the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. It's unclear yet if they're going to need that. They say they need that in the draft environmental impact statement, but someone from the Clean Air Agency said he wasn't sure if that was true. And they are commenting on this proposal too, so that's good. So there's other steps after this where you could do a legal appeal afterwards. So it's hard to say. I feel like we've got really great ground to stand on with SEPA and everything that everybody's raising. So I'm optimistic that the city will ask them to essentially do it again.
yeah, thanks, Erin. And will you just remind me, what is it was a big deal for the city to say, to make the determination of significance, like, what's the chances that then they say that, like, is there precedent for them saying this is so bad you have to go redo it, like, in a project like this?
I don't know if there's precedence for the city of Tacoma saying no. I'm not sure. I would guess that there is somewhere, a regulator looked at an environmental impact statement and said, no, there's no way you can mitigate this. You can't show that you're able to mitigate the harm. You're not allowed to do it. I'm not sure about that though. Like, I don't know an example. Yvonne, do you know one?
I was just thinking about Puget Sound Clean Air Agency doing authorizing a supplemental EIS for the LNG project, which required them to go out and do a greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. So there could be supplemental studies required, or so we don't know for sure. We probably won't know, these things can take a long time, obviously. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't know for a few months what the outcome is going to be moving forward, but Mike.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
One thing that did really stand out to me was there's really a distinction between the part of this whole process where they say they want to be allowed, they are already allowed to increase their capacity by 11%, tsunami zone or not. But the real issue you pointed out is that they're just letting the market determine the throughput. And the
Mhm.
throughput is the risk.
Yeah. Right. The
The-
risks.
It's risk in more than one way. The throughput is going to be the risk for the air quality, you know, the greenhouse gas and all that. But every time you put more through, you're going to have more leaks. I mean,
Right.
these transfer terminals have a terrible history of destroying rivers and bays. And
Mhm.
I mean, that was my career, is cleaning the damn things up.
Mhm.
So I just see that's a real pertinent thing that you started with, and have to hit them hard. And it'll be the same issue for the clean air. You know, people, they need to address that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they are submitting, they're reviewing it and submitting comments.
Yeah,
So I'm glad to hear that.
but maybe a little quick note to them that we're watching.
Oh, they know.
Well, they know you're watching.
They know.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
By the way, hi, everybody. I turned the light on in my car. Now you can see me.
Hi, Mike.
Bye-bye.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah, Barbara?
It's not really a question. I'm just I'm really looking forward to your email or your follow-ups thing, because it just helps so much to organize our thinking, those of us that are not in the middle of everything. And so I'm looking forward to that and having the points in it that you
Yeah.
think will make sense, and we can cut and paste and do our own thing.
Yes. Feel free to cut and paste. Feel free to edit, you know, whichever works for you.
Right, but it helps so much.
Yeah.
you know?
Great. Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to add, we're very grateful for you guys, Erin. I mean, really appreciate the work that you do that we can't do while we're doing other work, or, you know, I mean, it's awesome. So appreciate it. All the time and energy you guys put into this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anybody else?
The chat's all clear, so
Okay. Well, if you think of other questions, email me. I'm gonna here. If you don't have it, I'm just gonna put my email in the chat real quick. I will also say, if by tomorrow at like 1 p.m. you don't see the email, check your junk folder. Because sometimes our email, like the service that we use to send emails, I think people's servers like send it to their junk folder sometimes. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to like learn more about this, and whatever time you can spend submitting comments. That's really helpful for the regulators to hear from the people that are going to be impacted by this, because you all have experience and knowledge that's unique that you can put into your letters. And yeah, so thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Erin.
Good night.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.